Okay friends, to get started on our job, one of the first things we have to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, remove all of your lug nuts and then remove the wheel. Now with the wheels off, we have a nice clear view of our braking unit. Typically you don't have to remove your caliper or at least take it apart to do this job, but I'm just going to take it completely apart so I can inspect the pads. That way there, if there's an issue with those as well, I can take care of it now. If you're planning on just removing the caliper without taking it apart to inspect the pads, just remove your caliper bracket bolts right here, and then you can remove the entire unit and set it aside on your leaf spring. We're going to remove this caliper slider bolt here, and then this one right down here. Leave that one in a couple threads, do the same to the other one. Now the next thing that I'm going to want to do is go ahead and push back the caliper pistons that are in here. You're going to have two of them. There's one right here, and then there's one located over here. To do that, I'm going to come right inside this area here and just apply a little bit of pressure. This is going to help push in the caliper piston. With that off there, inspect this area here. If you see any fluid, you know you need a caliper. So now with that caliper off of there, I'm just going to go ahead and try to grab one of these pads. Nope, they're frozen in there. That's a good reason why you want to take your caliper apart instead of just taking the whole bracket off and setting it aside. We're just going to continue on to knocking them out of there. Do the same to the other side. Now it's time to take off our caliper bracket bolts. Leave that one in a little bit. Remove your bracket. Next, it's going to be time to remove your rotor. Typically, if you're going to be replacing the rotor, you can hit pretty much anywhere on it to help remove it. If you're not replacing the rotor, well then of course you're not going to want to hit on the braking surface. Obviously, you want to have a lug nut on here. That's going to make sure that doesn't fall off. Now, the next thing we're going to do is remove all these bolts right here so we can remove our locking hub. Now, a lot of times after you get the bolts out, you might have to give it a couple loving bonks just to break it free. There we are. Let's set this aside. Now that that's removed, let's continue on by removing our locking clip. I'm just going to get underneath this edge right here. The hardest part's getting it started. Once it starts coming out, it should come out fairly easily. There we are. Now behind that other clip, you're going to find a secondary clip. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for that one. With that out of there, we have a clear view of our snap ring. For that, you're going to need to use a tool that looks like this so we can spread the ears and remove it off the axle. Behind that, there's some washers. Let's go ahead and get those out of the way as well. There we are. Let's put all these in a pile, set them aside. So now we're going to follow the ABS wire all the way up and along this way, and then you should find that it's actually hidden behind this area right here. Typically you can just pry that out of there, and then you'll have access to it. After that, you're going to squeeze on this little tab right here, and then separate the two. Inspect it, make sure it's in good condition. If it has corrosion, you're going to want to make sure you take care of that. Set it aside. Now we'll come up here and start relieving all of its mounting points. Should be another one on there. And then of course we've got our bolt right here. So now we're going to remove the outer tie rod end from the knuckle. To do that, remove your cotter pin. Now we're going to separate this. Typically, if it's stuck in there, you can just bonk on this with a hammer to break it free. Now looking from the back side of the knuckle, you're going to find that you have the area where the studs from your wheel bearing come through and they're held on by nuts. There's 4 of them. One here, one up in this corner, and then of course on the other side you'll have 2 over there as well. Remove all 4. There's one. Okay, with all the nuts out of the back side of there, I'm going to turn this like this, and we're going to start separating the bearing from the knuckle itself. Starting to separate, just go back and forth, help it along. A little bit of penetrating couldn't hurt. Okay, so now to get the axle out of here, what we need to do is come in between the actual tubing itself and the axle, and we're going to gently pry this straight out. So have this so it's straight. I'm going to use my bar, carefully get in between here and here, and then we'll start bringing it out. There it is, friends. Now let's wipe out the area. Now you just want to look down inside the tube area there and inspect the seal. If it looks like it's damaged, now's the time to go ahead and replace it. Before we can continue on by putting in our axle, it's a good idea to just add a little bit of lubricant along this area here. Once you have it on there, let's go ahead and start installing. I'm just going to carefully bring this in. Okay. Now as we slide this in, we want to be very careful not to damage this forward seal here. Just press as you're twisting. There we are. If any of your studs came out with the nuts, then you just need to remove the nuts from the studs. Use a vise. Let's continue on by cleaning out this area here. We want to get out any of the debris that we can. Let's move along to cleaning up this outer portion here where the bearing is going to rest against. Let's continue on by sliding this on. Watch out for your ABS wire. Slide this right in. Now I'm going to use a rubber mallet. Now it's going to be time to put on all 4 of our mounting nuts. After we do that, we'll snug them up. Now let's torque all those nuts to 133 foot-pounds. Now we're going to put our tie rod back into the knuckle. Obviously our boot's in poor condition. We're going to replace this tie rod at a later date. Now let's start the nut on here, snug it up, and then we'll torque it to 67 foot-pounds. Put your cotter pin in there, and then pin it over so there's no way the nut can come loose. Now it's going to be time to secure our ABS wire. We have our bolt. Let's go ahead and slide it through the ABS wire just like this, into the knuckle. Let's snug it up. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take the ABS wire. We're going to bring it around here. Obviously, these are going to clip onto the brake hose in a second, but first we'll go ahead and slide this in here, lock it in. And we're going to come to this end, connect this in as well. Listen for a click, give it a nice tug. Now you want to make sure that this is secured on the back side of your wheel well. Now it's going to be time to put this back together. Obviously the flat disc here is going to go up against this. We'll take this one, slide it in there. 2 shims, slide that in as well. If it seems as though your axle is pushed too far in, you can just come from the back side, give it a little pull. That way there it exposes the area where your snap ring is supposed to be. Once the snap ring's in there, I'm just going to use a screwdriver, go around it with a couple loving bonks all the way around, just to ensure that it's completely secured. Typically what you would want to do next is add some sort of lubricant to this inner portion, something along the teeth area here, and then of course the area on the axle itself. Typically you just have to spin this until it slides right in. Now we've got our 2 clamps. We have the one that goes around several times, and then of course the locking clamp. We'll do the one that goes around several times first. I'm just going to spread it out like this. You can start one end in, and then just work it all the way around. Now let's get this one in here. Just Just going to start on one side. I'll hold it into the groove, then work it around. Just double check to make sure that it's completely inside the groove. You don't want it falling out. Now it's going to be time to get this back on here. We're going to line up our holes with the holes that are on there. Start in all of your mounting bolts. With them all started, let's snug them up and then torque them to 55 inch-pounds. It's a good idea to make sure you clean down the mating surface of the backside of your rotor that's going to be up against that bearing. Let's apply some copper never sees along the hub mating surface. To help prevent your rotor from moving around, just go ahead and start on one of your lug nuts just to hold the rotor still. Now let's get our bracket on the truck. When you're putting on the bolts, use a little bit of red thread locker. We'll start in both of the bolts, snug them up, and then we'll torque them to 166 foot-pounds. Now we're going to continue on by pushing in the rest of our caliper pistons here. Typically when you do this, you want to make sure that you're pushing them both in at the same time. Let's apply some lubricant along our pistons here. And along all 3 ears. Now it's going to be time to start installing our brake pads. After you have your pads in there, we're going to continue on putting these on. You're going to notice they have a couple little tabs. Those tabs fit into each of these little holes. Do one up along the top here. Just be careful because the purpose of these is to spread the pads. So of course, once you let it go, they're going to want to kind of separate. Hold them together. Grab your caliper. We'll slide it right over the top of those. And that's going to hold the pads in. Now let's put in our caliper slider bolts. Once again, a little bit of red thread locker, couldn't hurt. Once they're started, snug them up, torque them to 42 foot-pounds. Now let's get our ABS wire connected on here. Now we're going to get the wheel on here, start on all of our lug nuts, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we'll torque the lug nuts to 165 foot-pounds. With the wheel on the ground, let's get to torquing it. Torqued. Okay friends, now that the job's done, the last couple things you want to do is go ahead and pump up your brake pedal. After that, take your truck for a road test, check your four-wheel drive, and then get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop.